Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome. Welcome once again to Leadership and Strategic Management. I am Bill, the company's expert, and I apologize for the slightly late start and the title switcheroo. I misread the title for today. I thought we were doing next week's title, so I discovered a couple minutes before I'm supposed to go live that we're doing a whole different topic. So I switched them back very quickly. So sorry about that. But we will be doing next week, we'll be doing the show that was supposed to be scheduled for today. So there you go. Hopefully, if anyone is interested in that, that's the sob story behind it. The title for today is The Authenticity Trap: Why Leaders Can't Always Be Real. This is episode 17 of Leadership Skills for Managers. So we're going to talk about that today. So if you are interested in being a manager and sort of climbing the ladder, or, a leader in any other sense, I suppose, this applies across the board. I know this applies to like politicians and things like that. So, if you're interested in any of that stuff, this is something that I don't hear talked about a lot. It is studied in theory, when you learn business or you learn like political science, I imagine, but you don't hear it talked about. So I wanted to do a live stream talking about this. Even like myself in my career, nobody took me aside and told me this stuff. I was left to my own devices to figure it out. So it sort of comes through maturity. It becomes being in positions of responsibility and things like that. But it's learned more through osmosis than anything else. So welcome. This is the weekly live stream I do where we talk about business type stuff, higher level business ideas. So this is what we're talking about today. And it is a live interactive chat. I'm going to be presenting some concepts right off the hop, and then we can get into your questions if you guys have any questions about this kind of stuff. That's kind of the whole point. If you've been a subscriber to my channel for any amount of time, you should be able to see a chat box somewhere in the vicinity of my video feed. So get in the chat and let me know what your thoughts are on this, and we can get into it. It's been a hectic day today, so I don't know how your Friday's going, but the weekend is coming, TGIF. It's not Friday the 13th, so you can't say TGIF the 13th today, but, it's the next best thing, so that's all that matters. I think that's all. Oh, yeah. As always, public service announcement, special thanks to my YouTube channel members. You guys are awesome. Thank you for your support. Also, my Patreons, my super thanks donors, those are always nice to get. And you guys, my viewers and participants, you're awesome. Okay, without any further ado, let's dive into this. So the authenticity trap, why leaders can't always be real. Let's get in. Now today I prepared some slides, and just trying to crash in a sort of at the last minute to try and get myself prepared for this. So I want to see if I can bring those up. I figured we'd start with the definition of authenticity, just so everybody's on the same page. Not to beat this to death or anything, but just to cover it very quickly. So authenticity basically means to be genuine, to be real, true, right? Not false, blah, blah, blah. Honest in expression, reflecting one's true feelings, values, or identity. So that's what we mean by authenticity. Okay, you can see my mouse, right? Yeah, here we go. Okay, so in short, authenticity is being real, genuine, and true, both in substance and in character. Now, in management and organizational settings, which is kind of what we're dealing with today, right? This is in a business context. Okay, the word shifts slightly. So authenticity in business generally refers to leaders being transparent, consistent, and trustworthy. Means aligning words and actions so employees perceive honesty and integrity. Often framed as bringing your whole self to work while still respecting professional boundaries. That sounds really nice, doesn't it? That sounds beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But coming back to what the title of this live stream actually is the authenticity trap: why leaders can't always be real. So, although this sounds really pretty, you don't often get it. I would say almost never. So here we go down here, the tension. In practice, leaders cannot always be fully authentic. Now, maybe you've noticed this out in the real world if you've been an employee, or even if you haven't got that far yet, you've just been a student in school. You know, your teachers are leaders. The teachers report to somebody or other, a principal, a dean, you know, whatever the environment is. So you, I'm sure, have seen this. You're surrounded by leaders that have to influence people. And I mean, you tell me, are they authentic or not? I would guess not. Okay, so in practice, leaders cannot always be fully authentic. Confidentiality, diplomacy, and organizational interests often require restraint. And that's an understatement. Business authenticity usually emphasizes trust-building behaviors. So consistency, fairness, relatability over raw, unfiltered self-expression, right? And that's what that would be authenticity, the raw, unfiltered self-expression. You want to keep it real? You lay it out. No varnish, no toning it down. Here's what I think. Here's my position on it, okay? Unfortunately, we can start to see the tension, right? Because if you do that, it kind of contradicts with trust-building behaviors. Okay, so I kind of summarized this here. So broadly, authenticity means being real, keeping it real. Calls it like sees it. In business, it's less about saying everything you think or feel and more about showing integrity while balancing organizational responsibilities. Yeah, that's the trade-off. So we're going to get into it today. Before we start, though, I feel I have to acknowledge Alpine's pal in the chat who's been doing repeated posts here. Let's see. Okay, what we're doing today. I'm an early bird. Alpine's pal says, I'm an early bird. I just realized something about quotes. Okay, we're talking about quotes. The more you talk, the more you, and then you give a quote to me. Okay, so this is not the first time I think you've brought this up, Alpine's pal. Previously in a chat, I said that I don't like quotes. And I don't. I think that it's the lazy person's attitude to try and win an argument. I think it's completely ineffective at winning an argument or about pushing your point home. There's also something a little off-putting about it to me, which is that you're basically copying somebody else's thought. You're not expressing an original thought. You're simply transplanting somebody else's words and saying, this is what I believe. Nothing wrong with that, but it loses points for not exactly being original, you know? It's nice if you come with your own thoughts and feelings rather than carbon copying somebody else's. Now, Alpine's pal has been bringing this up repeatedly. I understand that you probably disagree with me on this, Alpine's pal, and that's perfectly fine. But I don't really want to debate it because there's no point, you know? Either you see it from my perspective or you don't, and either is fine. But you're not going to change my mind, you know, and my mind's pretty much made up on this one. So that's what I have to say about that. Okay, so let's get into this. Here's the meat and potatoes of this this idea of authenticity. Now, obviously, you know, actually, before we get into that, authenticity is regarded as a good thing, right? And the purpose of this live stream is basically to show everyone that as much as we would like to be authentic, it's really not possible a lot of the time. It really isn't. For example, if you're an employee and you go up to the boss and you tell the boss exactly what you think of them and exactly what you think of their plan and their instructions and what they've got you doing, as you can appreciate, that would probably be bad. You probably won't be an employee for much longer if you did that, right? So we tend to self-censor, right, in order to keep our job. This is one of hundreds of situations that you're going to encounter, especially when you're a leader of some kind. You're trying to influence people because you're doing people management to some degree. Either you're a supervisor or you're a manager. You have employees under you. And one of the things you have to do in that role is you have to influence behaviors. That means you have to get your employees to behave the way you would want them to behave. For example, they need to show up to work on time. That would be a behavior you would want, right? They need to follow the rules, the policies of the workplace. They need to follow your instructions, right? If they have an issue or there's some kind of violation of a rule, like a safety rule or something like that, you want them to come and tell you and to care about it and to try and take steps to remedy it, right? So there's a lot of behaviors that we want to get if we're managing people, right? So whenever you are in a position where you're trying to influence behaviors, like you're managing people or you're representing an organization, which happens when you get into the higher levels of management, it's very, very hard to be authentic about a lot of things, because the more you keep it real, the more damage you do. That's the unfortunate reality that it's hard to get away from. And rather than shying away from this issue and pretending it doesn't exist, like I see many, many people doing out in the world, I wanted to talk about this head on. So let's get into it. Okay, so I wrote down very quickly some concepts here, and we can talk about these. So I'm looking at the chat as we go through this. But let me throw a couple of these at you here. So first of all, leadership limits authenticity. Leaders representing organizations or groups cannot fully show their true feelings or opinions, as this could create conflicts or perceptions of unfairness among subordinates. I really wish I'd taken the trouble to write more examples of this down, but right off the hop, I'd like to throw that out to you. Now, I'm not saying that this is something that sometimes happens. I'm saying this is a thing that pretty much always happens. So as we go higher up and we get positions of increasing responsibility, we can't avoid this. There's just some things that you can't say because it looks bad. It creates a bunch of issues, not just for your employees, how you're viewed internally, like within your organization, but how you're viewed externally also by customers and other stakeholders like this. There's just no getting away from this, you know? You would love to be able to express your opinions and give your stance on every issue. The problem is, the moment you start doing that, bad things happen, and they happen quickly, and they happen in a big way. And this is the thing. So your behavior has to change. And if you don't realize this, it kind of limits what jobs you can get in terms of management jobs. Because if you haven't realized this yet, you are not going to be a contender to be moved into a leadership role or a role where you're managing people. Let's see here. We got Alpine's pal just going off on the chat here. Let's see. Where does this begin? Question. I've heard that omitting or hiding mistakes at work is an art. I'm not quoting. I think it's important to talk about examples of when to be honest and when to be quiet. Well, that's what we're getting into here. Now, it's not quite that situation, but it's similar. I'm coming at this from the point of view of the manager, okay? Alpine's pal says, it really feels like I'm the student that keeps interrupting you, doesn't it? I do apologize. I'm working on it. Don't worry about Alpine's pal. This is a live chat for a reason, okay? So you're not doing anything wrong. It's good to get enthusiastic people here. So keep it up. That I may not respond to everything you say, especially if it's like a non sequitur or something like this. You know, so keep that in mind, but I don't have a problem with you chiming in. Okay, second, so hopefully everybody understands that first concept. That's kind of the theme of this. Second thing, whoops, as I accidentally press buttons, confidentiality restricts authenticity. Okay, now here's the deal. Simply being privy to confidential information. Okay, like for example, if you're the boss, you know how much everybody makes. what their compensation is, right? That's usually kept confidential. But you would probably know how much all your employees are being paid, right? That's kind of pretty critical. Now, you would also be privy to other confidential, I can't speak today, confidential information. Like, for example, if there's been sort of disciplinary issues or anything like that, that also is usually private and confidential between the boss and the employee. And that would not be public information. So being privy to all that kind of stuff also is what I'm talking about here. So simply being privy to confidential information prevents full authenticity. Leaders must often act as if they don't know certain things to avoid pressure to disclose them. Authenticity is constrained by the role itself, not just by choice. So what I'm saying here is that just by being in that job, by definition, you can't be authentic. You can't just express how you feel and talk freely about everything. You just can't. There's so many things you've got to tiptoe around. You can't actually disclose. You can't hint at it. Things like this. It really puts a damper on being full and open with people. And it's no longer like a peer-peer relationship. Okay. So that leads into this. Influence. If you have influence, that means that, you're in a position of authority. You're trying to shape behaviors. That means by definition, you can't be authentic. Okay. Individuals or organizations seeking influence are almost universally not fully authentic. We see that on YouTube. Everybody's like selling something. Everybody's, talking to you like you're a potential customer. That means that they have a vested interest in you behaving a certain way, like buying their stuff or behaving, doing something else, right? That would be to their advantage. So one of their priorities is to get those behaviors. Either that's directly what they're trying to do, or there are a lot of incentives that are pushing them in that direction, whether they are really trying to do it or not. Okay. And because of that, they can't be real. They can't give you their full unfiltered thoughts on everything. It just won't work. It'll be contrary to those goals, right? Okay. Now this is something I've noticed out in the real world a lot, especially on the internet. Misinterpretation of words. Many people assume that if someone says something, they truly believe it. This is often not the case. Right? So like if you have a position and you say something, it always amazes me how innocent and believing people are. I think that people in general should be a lot more skeptical, cynical. They need to involve more critical thinking skills. There's a lot of people in authority that represent a lot of organizations, and they're playing a game of public relations. They come out and they say something, and it sounds very pretty, and it sounds very, very wonderful and nice. And everybody goes, "Oh," and then they believe them. And I'm thinking like, wow, I can't believe that worked. Apparently that worked. I didn't think that would work. I thought people just automatically are skeptical about these things, but apparently not. It works. So yeah, be on your guard, This is a constant thing. I'm not saying be paranoid. I'm not saying be completely cynical. But what I am saying is engage some critical thinking skills. Look at the incentive structure. Do these people benefit from you behaving a certain way or believing something? This comes into the conversation with like HR and employee relations, something that we kind of talk about on this channel. You get hired by a company and they feed you information internally. They make announcements. They say, okay, here's what's happening. We're implementing these changes, but don't worry, it'll be perfectly fine. Change is good, right? And then a lot of people lose their jobs and they get laid off, right? Things like this, right? Some things that a lot of poor companies do, right? They communicate with you because essentially they're playing public relations with their employees. They want their employees to believe a certain thing, to think a certain thing, and therefore it's to their advantage if their employees believe or think that. For example, stuff we've talked about in this channel, even something basic like a salary negotiation in a job interview, right? You know, if you're the employee or the candidate, you have complete polar opposite incentives than the employer, right? You want them to pay you as much money as possible. They want you to accept as little money as possible, right? Now, they would like to influence your thinking. They would like you to believe that, first of all, you're not going to get a better job anywhere else. This is the best offer you're going to get, so you better take it. And you better not get above yourself, you know? Secondly, they want you to think that, oh, you're not worth very much, so you should be happy to work here, and you should feel insecure. You know, you shouldn't feel too comfortable here. We want you to be constantly in fear for your job, so you're not going to slack off. You're not going to phone it in, okay? You're worried that, you know, if your performance lags, then, you know, you might be halfway out the door. That's what they want you to believe. They also want you to believe that, you know, you're very well paid, right? Nobody else is going to pay you this much. You're, you know, getting paid a lot for your worth. Your worth is very small, and you're getting paid a lot here, right? They would love you to believe all this stuff. That means you're going to accept a low amount of money. You're going to stay here, and you're going to be thankful. You know what I mean? Like, they would love to be able to implant those thoughts in the minds of the job candidates, right? And then later their employees. You know, this is directly to their advantage, right? So the thing is, if you're a recruiter trying to negotiate, or you're a manager trying to, you know, run a department or something, it's very hard to be authentic about these topics for a start, you know, because you have conflicting incentives here. You know, if you told your employees the truth, which you do want to do on some level, you know that that's going to punish you. You know, they're going to leave, or they're going to demand more money or whatever. And then you're going to look like an ineffective manager, right? So it's a conflict. So you'd love to be authentic, but you can't, because there are immediate and serious consequences for doing so. Now, I picked something pretty you know, extreme, like a salary negotiation. There's a lot of other examples of this, but I just picked that so you guys will understand what I'm talking about, like just illustrating the concept. Alpine's pal says, reminds me of customer service too. You have to keep a poker face, and then you hear them complain how awful that customer was to family members or friends, etc. Yeah, exactly. You know, that's the thing. You know, if the customer service representative told you, you know, as the plaintiff, the person with the complaint, you know, what they really think of you, you wouldn't be a very satisfied customer, right? You know, that's yet another good example. Like, there's so many of these, right? Okay, human behavior consistency, or, you know, the consistency in human behavior. People have consistently acted similarly over decades, regardless of trends. I mean, this is nothing new. This has been around since business has been around, right, for thousands of years. So this is not a recent development. However, it leads to this next one, authenticity as a buzzword. The recent emphasis on authenticity, I keep hearing that word being thrown around a lot on the internet. The recent emphasis on authenticity is largely a reaction to widespread inauthenticity in society. Yeah, it's like people are starting to realize this, yet at the same time we're still like very, very gullible, you know? So it's just an interesting kind of reaction to it. But you may have noticed this too. You know, this has become a bit of a trendy kind of thing lately. And finally, deliberate inauthenticity exists. Okay, this is kind of what I was talking about a little bit before about, you know, people not really engaging a lot of critical thinking skills, you know, and just being very gullible and believing and innocent about stuff. deliberate inauthenticity exists. Many entities intentionally behave inauthentically to deceive, manipulate, or exploit others for their own advantage, preying on those who are unaware or overly trusting. The obvious example is in advertising, right? Or any kind of promotional activity. If someone is selling a product or a service, right? Now, it's really a very fuzzy border between like legitimate promotion of something and outright deception, fraud, unethical practices, right? There's really a very fuzzy border between those. I think most people would agree that, if you promote yourself, you say, hey, look, I'm offering this, it's for sale, it's really good, it'll solve this problem for you. Most people would agree that there's nothing wrong in doing that. Maybe highlighting the advantages of something, maybe not fully disclosing all the known possible flaws, that I think also most people would reasonably agree that's okay, that's kind of what you expect. But once it flips over into deliberate fabrication, lying, fraud, misrepresentation, deliberately preying on somebody's ignorance of different things, I think most reasonable people would agree that that's kind of crossing a line. So somewhere in there is kind of the line. Everybody draws it in slightly different place, but once you cross that line, it's unethical. Right? Okay. So what I'm saying is that despite knowing this and most people feeling this way, there are a lot of people out there that deliberately kind of cross that line and don't care. They figured, hey, screw it. If I can get some kind of advantage or I can make money or whatever, then that justifies it. The fact that I can get away with it justifies it. I'm not sure how the logic works with these people. But for whatever reason, they don't have a problem doing it. So there's a lot of that. There is a lot of that. And there's a lot of that in business when we deal with employer-employee relationship or management-worker relationship, things like this, labor relations. This is something that's very real. Alpine's Pal says, and scams too, they're getting more creative on making it work. I always have to remind myself that it's not urgent when somebody is trying to sell me that it is, that I need time to see the red flags. Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, there's an obvious example, like high pressure sales tactics. I agree with you. I think most reasonable people would agree that high pressure sales tactics are really pushing ethics a bit. You know what I mean? If they're not completely crossing over into unethical territory. Once again, it's a fuzzy area, but I think it strikes a lot of people as being a bad thing. You're crossing that line. So there's an example. But like a lot of things you see, sales, the fact that there could be unethical practices going on, it's more visible, it's more obvious. People expect it more. What's more damaging is when, kind of what I'm talking about here in business, is where you're not expecting the person to be inauthentic. You're expecting your boss to want to work with you. You work for them, they pay you, you have a mutually beneficial relationship. You're not expecting them to turn around and lie to you, or sabotage you. I think most people don't expect that. Now, we do get that a lot, right? But for some reason, a lot of people really don't expect it. This is what I'm saying. I think people should have more critical thinking skills and kind of spot the incentives. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. Some of the things we talked about. This is something else I want to bring up. This is a very common thing these days. I think the last 10 years have really illustrated the reason why this is a thing. So neutrality is a strategy. And I think probably one of the most obvious examples of this is Hollywood, surprisingly enough. Okay, so strategic neutrality. Staying deliberately neutral to maximize influence and minimize controversy. So this is the thing where you don't give your opinions, you don't give your position on a lot of divisive or controversial issues, right? Or sensitive issues. So issue avoidance, this comes from public relations. Choosing not to comment on hot button issues because there's no upside for the brand, right? You know, like you're talking about whatever it is you sell and somebody says, well, how does this impact, you know, LGBTQ issues or something? And you basically say like, look, that has nothing to do with this product we're trying to sell. I don't want to comment on it. No comment, you know, something like that. I don't know. The law of subtraction in marketing. This is a marketing term. Every opinion expressed subtracts part of your audience. So, for example, if you just sell, I don't know, a product that, you know, some mundane like industrial product, you know, you service elevators, you know, that's what you do. And then somebody asks you, okay, you know, what do you think about Palestine? You know, like, you know what I mean? Like, or some other controversial issue, politically charged issue. You know, the idea is that every time you get drawn into those issues and you start expressing what your opinions are, whatever your opinions are, it's bad because you're now conflicting with a part of your customer base, your market, right? That's the idea. So whatever opinions you hold, chances are that, you know, some part of your customer base is going to object with you. They're going to look at you unfavorably now. They're going to realize, well, now I no longer get a warm, fuzzy feeling about this person or this company because they hold these opinions or their representative holds these opinions. So I no longer agree with them. So, you know, I'm not going to buy their product or something, right? So this is a well-known thing. So in marketing, they call that the law of subtraction. Okay, here's another sort of version of it, a non-alignment strategy. So in political science, okay, so borrowed from geopolitics, remaining uncommitted keeps options and alliances open. Okay, so the idea is that you don't sort of give your firm position one way or another on a variety of issues. That keeps your options open. So it's to your advantage to not commit, to not express an opinion or an intention on a lot of issues, right? So it's the same basic idea, you know, neutrality as a strategy. And you see it in all these different disciplines, right? We see it in business, not just in marketing, but we see it in business, in HR, like employee relations and things like this. So you could express it this way. You could say in leadership and in business, neutrality is often a hidden strategy. Okay? This is not something that they openly disclose, but it's something that, you know, a lot of high performance managers and stuff do. The moment you take a stand on a polarized issue, you divide your audience. Silence keeps your appeal broad. Opinion narrows it, and almost always to the negative, right? So there you go. So that's kind of what this is. Now, as I said, no one's ever taken me aside and taught this. Now, retroactively, I've seen this concept taught that's buried deep down in some of these disciplines, but no one's really taken you aside. It's actually a central part of your role as a people manager or as a representative of an organization. If you want to be a contender to, you know, be promoted into a position where you're managing people or you're representing the organization publicly, this is kind of something you need to know, and you need to have demonstrated that you can walk this talk, because people are not going to trust you in that position unless you know things like this and you behave this way. Right? So this is why I wanted to present this to people. Now, I'd like to open this up to questions. I've covered a few things so far, and I'd like to get your reaction to it, your opinions. Have you noticed this? Is this something that, you know, you've seen people talk about explicitly a lot? I certainly haven't. That's why I wanted to bring this up. But this is quite critical to being promoted into those positions, your understanding of this. And as far as I can tell, the way people normally do this is they just rely on the fact that you've had a track record of positions of increasing responsibility that demonstrates you understand this and several other concepts, and then they sort of regard you as a contender to move into a higher level position. Okay. Alpine's pal says, and we're not allowed to talk about our competitors, depending on the context. That's interesting, because what do you think they talk about at sort of higher levels? They talk about nothing but, often. There are some companies where their strategy is we're going to kind of ignore what our competitors are doing and just do our own thing. You do see that. That's usually not a winning strategy. Sooner or later, all things being equal, that does catch up with you. But in most organizations, in most industries, like they're talking about their competitors a lot at high levels. They're watching them like a hawk. And I mean, after all, they're in the game to beat these people. That's what their goal is. You know what I mean? The idea is not necessarily that they're aggressive or whatever, it's just that if you don't, that's pretty much the strategy they will have about you. So you have no choice, really. Ignore it at your peril. Irene is here. Hello to Irene. Thank you for being here. I'm interested in what Irene and anyone else has to say. There are 10 people here. Thank you for being here. Here we go with Alpine's pal. Now, LGBT, you forgot all the other letters at the end of that, is becoming more common in lots of stores, put pride flag stuff, which explicitly appeals to them. Your thoughts? You see, here you go. You're asking me to engage on this. Well, here's what I'll say. Here's what I've observed. Yes, that's been a bit of a minor trend. There's been some high-profile examples of it. Now, what I've noticed, and I'm not alone here, this is pretty easy to see, is that in some high-profile cases of this, they've been ignoring the rules of marketing to do this. See, marketing basically says, whatever your customers want, whatever they will respond to favorably, you should do. Like you get ahead by giving people what they want. If you can meet their wants and their needs, that's what success is all about, So understanding what they want and what they need is kind of primary, and then being able to deliver it, right? Now, the high profile examples of this that have been talked about, like all over the internet and also in some business circles, they're notable because they've done stuff like this, like what you're describing. They've done that, and they've gone completely contrary to what their customer base wants or needs, at least as they've expressed their needs. And so regardless of which issue it is, whether it's the pride thing or any other thing, they've encountered like it's been gloriously ineffective, which has led a lot of people to conclude in business circles that this must be driven by ideology, because it's not being driven by the marketing process, which these people are supposed to be following, right? Now, because they haven't followed the marketing process by finding out what people want and then giving it to them, instead they're just deciding, we're going to give them this, regardless of how they feel. It's been a tremendous, earth-shattering failure in the several high-profile cases that have been discussed across the internet quite widely, right? It doesn't matter what you're trying to do. We're not talking about pride. We're talking about anything that goes completely contrary to the rules of marketing. But in the past, whenever you see that, it's usually met with tremendous failure. And that's what we see here. You know what I mean? So it's just strange. It's strange how like some companies that, this stuff ironically really doesn't represent their installed base has like really gone for it, And it's strange. Like you would think that like other brands where this would be more representative of their clientele, of their customer base and their market. They don't have much of a problem with it. It might be a tremendous success if they did it, but they're not the ones we're seeing implementing this in a big dramatic way. We're seeing like the weirdest brands that you wouldn't associate with, so there's a lot of politics. It's very politically charged, and so that's why it's noteworthy. It's because it's like, wow, this is not being driven by the marketing process. It's very, very bold, and like Hollywood has done that too. That's been talked about a lot, Basically, that's the thing about business. I mean, at its core, business, it doesn't have an ideology. It doesn't have any goals other than to make money. And in order to make money, you have to, find a potential customer and give them what they want. So, it's ironic. In the past, people were commenting on how businesses had no soul. They would go whichever way, do whatever thing they would need to do that people responded to that would turn those people into paying customers, right? And ironically, now we're going the opposite direction, but yet it's still controversial, So go figure. Yeah. Normally, I steer clear of talking about politics or any kind of politically charged issue. I mean, I have no desire to get into that. I honestly really don't care. People can do whatever the hell they want. I mean, you know what I mean? I'm just talking about business. Business is just here to deliver value. You don't deliver something to people that they consider bad or worthless. You deliver something that meets their wants and needs. If you're not doing that, then you're not doing a very effective job with your marketing operations. If nobody has taken or steals it, I'll make a username. Just call me Al. That was a song, wasn't it? That was like a Paul Simon thing. I remember when that song came out. Like, You Can Call Me Al. Yeah, that was it. You Can Call Me Al. It was like in the 80s. They had a video with Paul Simon and Chevy Chase in it, if everybody remembers these people. Probably not. Mausumi is here. And Mausumi says the letter E. Awesome. And I think we all know what that means, and we all stand firmly behind you when you express that. Alpine's pal says, you're good, and I have the same approach. I really like this conversation, especially because the content here is business. Yeah, but I mean, we're talking about that stuff here in the context of it's yet another example why, people managers, business leaders, anybody seeking influence, they can't keep it real. They can't be authentic, because the moment you start, it's a great example of like people that shoot their mouth off about their personal opinions. They broadcast their personal opinions, and they see their customer base decimated. It's because of this principle. I mean, we see that in politics. Up until recent times, we've seen that in politics. That was often commented about, where politicians would talk and talk and talk, and they'd say nothing because they don't want to commit to a stance on an issue, because the moment you do, you alienate all of your would-be supporters that don't hold those opinions, right? Or that particular opinion. So the way to keep your entire following intact and supporting you would be to not alienate any of them, which means that you don't shoot your mouth off about issues and lose people when you don't need to, especially like, issues that have nothing to do with your strategic goals or, something you're taking a stand on. You know what I mean? Yeah. So anyway, so there you go. Okay. So to just, I just want to say, like, we talked about authenticity today, and we talked about certain things. Now, what I'd like to impress upon everybody is that, everybody imagines if you're a worker and your ambition is to move into management, to run something of your own, or you're going the entrepreneurial path, and you're not going from a worker to a supervisor to a frontline manager to a mid-level manager. You're not doing that within like an organization. You're going out on your own. We all have these fantasies of being able to be like 100% authentic, but yet being like super successful at the same time and having it be easy, and unfortunately, something I've learned over my career is that that's very, very hard to achieve, because just by being in some of these positions, by definition, the moment you're in that role, it means you can't talk about this and you can't talk about that. You can't disclose this. You can't disclose that. And if you express your unfiltered opinion on this, on any of these issues, you're doing harm to yourself and your organization, and there will be consequences. So, you know what I mean? Like, that's what I found, and it sort of shatters that dream of like, I'm going to be a boss. I'm going to be a good boss. I'm going to, I'm not going to play with people. I'm going to, do everything forthright and treat everyone honestly and give it to everybody straight and, all this kind of stuff. Very transparent, very authentic. There's real things in place. So being able to sort of navigate this really helps. So if you're someone that's wanting to move into management and have a leadership position of any kind, even if you just want to be like an internet influencer or something, I don't know, nothing to do with business really, get into these issues, really learn about all the nuance here and like some of the principles that are in, because a lot of people have been dealing with for this stuff for a very long time. And a lot of really smart people have been studying this stuff, and they've actually managed to figure out quite a lot of things that can help you to play this game, to be as authentic as you possibly can, know where those lines are, be very clear about expressing them. So even though you can't really go there, you can at least not deceive anybody, things like this. So anyway, there's a lot of learning on the subject. If this is something you want to do, you're ambitious, learn about this stuff. Learn about it before you get there, and learn it the hard way, okay? By possibly losing your job or losing points or being downgraded or not being promoted because you got this stuff wrong and no one was there to tell you about it before you stepped on this landmine and just learned it the hard way. That's the thought I'd like to leave everyone with. So hopefully you found this useful. Thank you for everybody that was here. We got like 5 people here. You guys are awesome. I will be back same time next week with another one of these live streams on strategic management for leaders or strategic leadership for managers, whichever way you want to slice it. If you guys have any suggestions for topics, let me know. Other than that, take care of yourself. I'm going to be live in 1 hour on this channel talking about job search. So stay tuned for that. Until then, take care of yourselves. And if I don't see you, have yourselves a great weekend. Bye.